Hi, Bluegrass Area Homemakers. So my name is Kendall Redding. I'm the Powell County FCS agent, and I was scheduled to teach the April leader lesson this month. So obviously we're not meeting face-to-face and we're not getting that lesson. So instead of canceling them all, I thought maybe I could just record it for you all so you can use it for future use. So the topic for this lesson is chronic disease management through cooking. And there isn't a specific lesson plan for this, so I have just put together several publications and resources and made up my own lesson that way. So this one will probably serve more as a mail out since we probably aren't going to be teaching them face-to-face in May, but we still can save them for the future so you can use those publications, and then you can also use this video as a resource as well. So I'm sure everyone has heard the phrase, you are what you eat. And if you've ever taken a second to think about what that means, it really is true. So what you put in your body is what you're going to get out of it. So if you don't put good things in it, you're probably not going to get good things out of it. And we know that the things that we eat can impact how we think, how we feel, maybe how well we sleep, and how just our bodies function from day to day. So there's certain nutrients that we want to make sure that we get enough of and things that we limit because depending on what they are, they can lead to, progressive health conditions or worsening of chronic diseases. So there are certain chronic diseases that are related to poor nutrition, and those are here in this table. So they are obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, and COPD. So those are chronic diseases that are commonly linked to poor nutrition habits. So research has shown that a diet high in added sugar is linked to type 2 diabetes, and that is due to the weight gain. A diet high in sodium is linked to high blood pressure, and a diet high in unhealthy fats such as saturated and trans fat are linked to heart disease. And then on the other hand of that, there are certain nutrients that are linked to good health. So lean protein is linked to a healthy weight or maintaining a healthy weight. And then vitamins and minerals from fruits and vegetables are linked to cancer prevention and improved lung function. So we can make lifestyle choices every day that are going to help to prevent these conditions or prevent the worsening of these conditions by improving our nutrition. So we're going to talk about nutrients that we want to focus on in our diet. So these are going to be things that we want to try and incorporate not only every day, but also with every meal if we can. And I'm going to use the nutrition label primarily as a guide because that's usually what we're going to be looking at when we make those choices. So some things you might see on a nutrition label would be carbohydrates, protein, fats, and vitamins and minerals. And there are certain ones of those that we want to focus on, and there are certain ones that we want to reduce. So the ones that we would want to increase would be the vitamins and minerals and dietary fiber. So food high in dietary fiber, such as whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and legumes, are going to help to protect against diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and constipation. And then foods high in vitamin A are going to help protect our eyes and improve their functioning, and also protect the body from infection. Vitamin C is an antioxidant that's going to help prevent cancer-causing components from building up in our body. And calcium is needed for strong bones and teeth, and it also helps to prevent osteoporosis. Iron is needed to carry oxygen to the blood cells where energy is made. So people that typically lack in iron might feel extremely tired or fatigued. And then it can also lead to a condition called anemia eventually. And the nutrients that we want to limit, so ones that we want to reduce in our diet, are going to be saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, sodium, and added sugar. So these are typically the nutrients that the majority of Americans are already getting too much of. So these are the ones that we want to try and limit or reduce in our diet if we can. So we're going to discuss ways that we can modify recipes to reduce those nutrients, and how we can kind of improve maybe recipes that we're already making to help them better serve our bodies by enhancing their nutrition. So the objectives for this lesson are to identify unhealthy food ingredients in our recipes, determine appropriate modifications to improve those recipes, and manage calorie intake through recipe modifications and portion control. So a lot of what we eat has to do with our food environment, and that usually depends on your family traditions or cultures practiced in your community. So depending on where you live, there might be different ingredients or cooking methods used compared to other populations or other areas. So the most common ingredients used in rural communities, unfortunately, are not usually health promoting. So if you think about where you live, or where we live here in central and eastern Kentucky, we have a lot of fried foods, a lot of foods cooked in animal fat like lard or butter. We use a lot of mayonnaise in casseroles and salads. Um, so those are things that not necessarily are always a bad thing, but we definitely want to limit them and not have them be a part of our everyday diet. So we can modify those recipes, but we doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice and never eat those things again. You just have to find some compromise and find ways to make them a little bit more nutrient dense so that we can have them regularly. These are the 5 verbs that we're going to focus on when we are considering modifying recipes. And those are portion, eliminate, modify, enhance, and reduce. So the first one, portion. So obviously portion control is important when you're wanting to watch what you eat or watch your calorie intake. So just being mindful of your portion sizes can be super helpful, especially when you're trying to manage a chronic disease like, high blood pressure or diabetes. Um, Portioning out your food can be really helpful. Spacing out your meals is also pretty helpful. So you can do this by portioning out your food for dinner on a smaller plate or a smaller bowl. And then if this is something that is a particular struggle for you, um, then you can make sure that you start your meal with things like fruits and vegetables, things that you can eat a lot of that are going to fill you up before you move on to your entree or even your dessert too. Eliminating unhealthy food components by replacing them with something a little bit healthier is another key component. So an example of this would be to replace salt with fresh herbs or salt-free seasoning. You can also replace maybe lard with a healthier cooking oil like olive oil or even canola oil. So finding healthier replacements to substitute for certain ingredients can be very helpful, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on. And the third thing would be modifying the cooking method. So we talked about a common cooking method, maybe in a lot of our communities, would be deep frying. So instead of maybe deep frying your French fries at home, you could bake them in the oven. Another example would be when you're cooking your vegetables. So a lot of us like green beans with bacon fat and a ham hock in them, and we like to put them in the crock pot and let them cook all day. However, whenever you cook your vegetables all day, you lose a lot of the nutrients in the water that you cook them in. So instead of throwing them in the crock pot all day, try steaming them or blanching them on the stove. That way you can maintain the color and the nutrients as much as possible. And then enhancing nutrition by replacing an ingredient with something a little bit more nutrient dense. So a good example of this would be to replace your regular refined or your enriched pasta with a whole grain pasta. You could also replace them with a whole food. So maybe instead of using pasta, using spaghetti squash or spiralized vegetables would be another way you could enhance the nutrition. And the last one is to reduce overall amount of unhealthy ingredients. So this will be really easy, especially in baking. You can reduce the sugar by half in your baked goods or finding some other replacement for your sugar. And then also in cooking, you can use this for other ingredients like maybe oil and reducing that by half or finding a different substitution for it. So here's some examples of ways that we can modify our recipes. So an example of modifying a cooking method might be instead of using shortening or butter to spread onto a pan for your muffins or your quick breads, instead use the cooking sprays or brush it with a little bit of olive oil. An example of enhancing nutrition would be replacing cream of mushroom, cream of chicken soup in your casseroles with pureed vegetables for thickening. Eliminating an unhealthy ingredient, so you could eliminate cream cheese from a recipe and instead use either a low-fat or a non-fat option for cream cheese or a pureed cottage cheese. For reducing overall amount, we've already talked about sugar, so you could reduce the sugar by half in your baked goods, or you could replace it with unsweetened applesauce for a 1-to-1 ratio, or some other kind of pureed fruit. Another example of enhancing nutrition would be replacing half of your all-purpose flour with a whole wheat flour. And then the last one, eliminating an unhealthy ingredient. So instead of using a high sodium chicken or beef or vegetable broth, purchasing the lower sodium option, or you could even eliminate it and replace it with water. And that would work as well, depending on what you're making. So just to recap, the 5 verbs to consider when you're modifying recipes are portion, eliminate, so eliminate unhealthy food components, modify cooking method, enhance nutrition by replacing ingredients, and reduce overall amounts of unhealthy ingredients. So obviously, whenever you're modifying recipe, patience is always key. And this is true for any time you're trying to make drastic changes in your diet. Taking small steps or gradual changes is going to be more effective than changing everything that you do. So just be patient. It's just a process of trial and error. You'll learn how to adjust recipes to your taste as you go. And it's kind of fun just to experiment with new recipes and see how you can improve on maybe some of your favorites. So here's an example, and you'll actually find this in one of the publications from the leader lesson. So we have an original recipe and a modified recipe, and this is for carrot cake sandwich cookies. So in the original recipe, it calls for 1 cup packed brown sugar and 1 cup granulated sugar. And if you compare that with the modified, they decreased the sugar by half in both of those. They also replaced the butter with half oil, half applesauce. So instead of using the 2 sticks or the 1 cup butter, they replaced that with half a cup of oil and half a cup of applesauce. And then the other modification was in the flour. So the original called for 2 cups of flour. In the modified, they replaced half of the flour with whole wheat flour. So these were pretty simple substitutions. And if you compare the nutrition information here at the bottom, you can see that it made quite a bit of difference. So the original recipe was 200 calories per serving, 8 grams of fat, 4.5 grams saturated fat, 30 grams carbohydrates, and 19 grams of sugar. And if you compare that with the modified, it made a big difference. So 70 calories per serving, 2.5 grams of fat, there's 0 saturated fat now, and only 5 grams of sugar and 11 grams of carbs. But I will point out, they also modified the serving size in here So the original was a cookie sandwich. So the serving was 1 sandwich, which is 2 cookies. And in the modified, they just made regular cookies, and the new serving size was 1 cookie. So that is one reason why there is such a drastic difference in these, is the portion is quite a bit smaller, but it still does make a big difference as far as nutrition wise. So I thought we would kind of go through a common recipe that maybe everyone makes fairly often in their household, and go through and see what kind of modifications we could make in order to make it a little bit more nutrient dense, to get a little bit more bang for our buck out of this. So I chose spaghetti with ground beef sauce. So I feel like this is probably a go-to recipe for a lot of people, and something that a lot of us probably have ingredients for on hand most of the time. So for the original recipe, it calls for a pound of ground beef, onion, garlic, green bell pepper, diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, tomato paste, and then some salt and seasonings. So we might think about portion first. So I don't know about you all, but spaghetti is something that I can eat a large portion of, especially if I'm going to have it for a meal and I'm really hungry. So if this is something I know that I'm going to have a large portion of, I might find ways where I can cut calories and maybe fat, and other ways where I can still eat a large portion of it and not feel bad about it. So an easy way to do that for especially pasta might be to replace some or all of the pasta with a vegetable. So you might use spaghetti squash instead of spaghetti, or spiralized vegetables like zucchini and squash, or even broccoli or sweet potatoes. And you can either replace all of your noodles, or if you don't want to replace them all, replace half of them. And that way you're adding extra vitamins and minerals, extra nutrients, and you're cutting out a lot of the excess calories that you don't necessarily need. So moving on to eliminate. So we might eliminate unhealthy food components in this recipe. So in a meat sauce, typically it's probably going to have ground beef. So we could eliminate the ground beef and find a leaner meat that we could use, something that's not as high in saturated fat, like ground chicken or ground turkey. You could also do the meatless route on this, and instead of using meat, you could use ground or crumbled up tofu in your tomato sauce. You could use lentils instead of the ground beef to kind of give you that meaty texture. Or you could use chopped up mushrooms, again, to give you that meaty texture without using the ground beef. But you could also, again, like the noodles, just replace half. If you're still not ready, maybe you don't like the taste or you like the texture of that ground beef, just use half a pound of ground beef and maybe half a pound of chopped up mushrooms. And again, you would still be adding extra nutrients, extra vitamins and minerals, and extra fiber from those vegetables. So that could also be an example of modifying the cooking method, is replacing your noodles or half your meat. You could enhance the nutrition again by adding in pureed pumpkin or pureed butternut squash into your tomato sauce, or even just throwing in some vegetables that you have sitting around in your fridge that you don't know what to do with, just bits and bobs in your fridge, just adding more vegetables in your tomato sauce, because it's really easy to hide vegetables in that. And then for reducing the overall amounts of unhealthy ingredients, so we already talked about your noodles, your beef, but you could also, again, go for the low sodium tomato sauce products or the no salt added. And then you can either reduce or totally omit the added salt in here if you wanted to. So here's another example of modifying recipes. So this wasn't necessarily because I was trying to make it healthier, but it was mainly because I didn't have all of the ingredients, but I still wanted to make a well-balanced, healthy meal, while kind of using this recipe as a suggestion. So I wanted to make these turkey stuffed peppers. So this is the March calendar recipe from our NEP calendar this month. But I didn't have any bell peppers, so I used sweet potatoes instead. And so I know that this isn't totally like an equal product because potatoes are very starchy. But this still is a better choice because sweet potatoes have the vitamin A and all those vitamins and minerals that we want from that we would normally get from the peppers rather than using just a regular white potato. And then I didn't have any ground turkey, so I used a lean ground beef instead, and I just used half the amount. So I didn't use the full pound that it called for. Um, I had the black beans and I had the brown rice already. I didn't have any salsa, so I used the diced tomatoes with green chilies instead, and that worked. That worked pretty well. Um, but yeah, so I just kind of made my own modifications, but I still tried to make a balanced meal that had a lot of vitamins and minerals in it. So I served it with a side salad as well. So if I was making a meal at home, I might think of my plate as a guide to make a balanced meal, or I might think of those macro and micronutrients. So making sure that you include a whole grain for your carbohydrate, a healthy fat, a lean protein, and then also making sure you have vitamins and minerals from vegetables and fruit or legumes. And you can kind of build your own balanced meal that way. So that concludes our lesson. I know that nutrition is kind of an overwhelming topic sometimes, and we can go into great depth. I just kind of skimmed the surface today, though. But if you all find that you're very interested in this topic and you want more resources, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information was on the first slide, or you can reach out to your extension office and we would be happy to get more resources for you or answer any questions that you might have. I've created a post survey on Qualtrics for you all, so you can complete that by following this link or scanning the QR code. But yeah, so if you all have any questions, feel free to contact me. And I hope you all are staying safe at home and practicing social distancing. And I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you.